Right, let's start. So my talk is called Metrics, KPIs, Measuring Upwards and Managing Success. Something about me. I'm 37. I've been in IT for 20 years or maybe even more, and I've been JavaScript developer for I think 30 years. Then I was team lead for 7 years. Now I'm developer relations specialist, mentor, developer advocate, whatever you call it. So I help my company to work with communities around the world so that communities understand the product better, and I and my company understand the community better. So build a proper bridge between the communities and the product. So I'm sure you've all heard of lines of code metric. It's like ages and ages. It's been done ages and ages ago. It's the most known metric of all times, I think. I've linked a study on history of this metric. There was actually a proper scientific study of the history of it. And as soon as I provide the slides, I will ask Darren to attach the slides to the event page later. You will be able to have a look at this link as well. So basically, lines of code was widely used in assembler language and in COBOL language, which is like 50 or 60 years ago. It was okay at the time, because if you remember, or if you saw assembler or COBOL, you might have noticed that only one instruction per one line was possible. So you couldn't have something crazy as I have on the screenshot done. So if you have a look at the screenshot, on the bottom, you see a perfectly valid one-liner for loop in JavaScript, doing console log of I from 0 to 9, and the same, but in 8 lines, the same for loop, but in 8 lines. So if you have a metric in your software development process of lines of code, it can be easily gamed, or people will just use different style of writing code, and this metric will be completely absurd. I'm just using this metric as the very first and most absurd example. Then there are multiple metrics that we all have in our daily software development life. Some might argue that hours of work is not a metric, and yet in many companies there is time tracking. So essentially, if you work less than, let's say, 8 hours a day, you might have a few things to discuss with your manager. Potentially, your manager will come to you and say, why the hell didn't you work 8 hours a day while everyone worked 8 hours a day? What's the problem with these hours of work? Well, there are plenty of evidence. There is plenty of scientific studies proving that different types of work can be done in 8 hours. Let's say I can do coding for 8 hours, but I can't do architecture design for 8 hours a day. My brain will just explode. So if your company uses hours of work as a metric, then you don't cater for different types of work. And so sometimes I'm productive, and I consider myself productive when I've worked only 2 hours a day. The remaining time I was just thinking about it. So if you use this metric, you kind of force or maybe encourage people to either work more hours and burn out, or work more hours. Like there are rumors that in Japan, people work for crazy hours on a daily basis, but are not as productive as some people in other countries. So if you just use this metric, it's going to be absurd too. Then there is a metric, number of bugs for a developer, let's say. So kind of makes sense, right? So if you make lots of bugs, if the code you produce has lots of defects in it, you seem to have some issues and you need to improve on that. But then what happens, pardon me, what happens and what I witnessed during my development times, that people try to add more time to the estimate, let's say, in order to be able to properly, like do way too much testing for the code they produce, just to be safe, not to have more bugs. Sometimes it's more valuable to ship faster and fix some defects later. But if you have these metrics, this metric, this particular one, chances are your developers won't listen to you asking them to produce code faster. So it's kind of absurd too. It kind of provokes negative behavior. Then there might be a metric of number of times a feature returned to development from testing. That's quite an often metric. I saw it a lot. The meaning, the goal, the original goal of it was, again, kind of making sense. Like if you have something, some code given to manual QA engineers to verify the quality, and if they return it back to you multiple times, it should mean that you kind of didn't pay enough attention to the quality of the code. And I've seen how this metric fails people. It's very simple. It gives you lack of transparency, how it works. So basically, developers who don't want to be punished for multiple returns from testing to development, they ask QA engineers to test everything while they're still doing it in development, which might be okay, but might be not. But again, this metric provokes concealing of the information by developers. So they don't want to pass it to QA. They just want to test it right here, right now.